Today, I want to talk about my experience with being psychological kin. Talk about how this has shaped me as a person, how the community handles psychological kin, as well as the greater outside world. So, without further ado, Otherkinity has been in my life ever since I can remember. From the age of 3, um, I can remember feeling non human and having alters that were also non human. I've also found for my life and my experience, my mental health and otherkinity are two things that have wound themselves together. I can never look at one without looking at the other, and they play a critical role in my identity. I can say, as psychological otherkin right now, I stand at a really interesting intersection of my life where I have the most freedom I've ever had and dealing with the worst trauma I've ever had to face, which is very fun. I recently got out of a bad long-term relationship, something I had been in for about 7 years, and I can say the events I've lived did and still do directly impact my identity and change how I see myself. For me, I can't explore my otherkinity without exploring my trauma and mental health. These two parts of myself are closely woven together, and DID is a product of trauma, and it's something that rules over my life daily. It's something I don't just accommodate, it's a way of life for me. And for the past 3 years, I've been in intensive therapy, going at least once every 2 weeks, and at one point, going twice a week. Completed an inpatient and outpatient program, and needless to say, I have been fortunate enough to not be in a lot of debt. However, I would like to think that these things helped me immensely. With the background talk out of the way, let's get into how these things shaped my identity. A little bit about me. I'm diagnosed with DID or dissociative identity disorder. This means my identity is split apart between alters or alternate personalities. If you're unfamiliar with plurality, I can say with confidence that it can be its own talk, but here's what you need to know. My alters are distinct, each having their own morals, ideals, life perspectives, lived experiences, and memories separate from my own. We all share one body, like roommates share an apartment space. My alters are a result of trauma I experienced during my life, and each of us hold our own share of trauma. So, imagining trauma is sandbags. Instead of one person holding 100 pounds of sand, we have given 25 pounds of sand to foreign alters, which is much more manageable. My alters, including me, were shaped from the environment they came from, and alters also share an inner world where they can interact with one another. This is also a place where they can easily see their own identity and how they view themselves internally. So, some other fun things about me. I have mild psychotic symptoms. Since I'm in my early 20s, they're pretty manageable at the moment, and I'm always keeping an eye out for them worsening, though. These things include hallucinations, visual, auditory, touch, smell, taste. I also have a weird mix of beliefs that can mix into delusion territory, but aren't damaging to my life, and therefore can't really place a good label on them. So I consider them delusional-like, but not the same experience as a true delusion. I believe I could be very much wrong, though. My first identity shift was when I was a child, about 3 years old. That was the first time as an alter I became prominently separate from our host. It was apparently at the time I was non-human, and a hyena was my first identity. I looked like a hyena from Lion King, roughly, no character in particular, and acted as a companion and friend. When I got a bit older, at 4 to 5, my identity shifted once I moved and left behind some family. I changed from a hyena to a Pokemon, and if I could guess, I would say it's due to a Pokemon's inherent loyalty. My identity became a Mightyena, a wolfish hyena, basically, and with the with the codependency that Pokemon carry, that carried over too. I was depended on to be support for our host and take care of them as a caretaker. We experienced neglect at the time, and this was reflected with my identity. I was a creature that was supposed to stay with someone forever, basically, giving comfort we were missing from our host so they could continue functioning. I would say my identity changes based on my environment and is sensitive to my environment all the time. Depending on what depending on what experiences I have, it changes the way I see myself. This is because we adapt as a system to the world around us. I often think if my identity I often think if my identity isn't shifting a little, it might be a sign of trouble and us shutting down of being unable to adapt and change. When I was 5 to 6, it changed to its own species called a threatening wolf. I actually did a panel last year about original species because of it, and it stayed a threatening wolf all the way until a few months ago, which has been very fun. Um, my identity as a threatening wolf, though, changed a lot. I got spikes at one point, then I got like a sword tail, then I was able to breathe fire. My size would shift and change, my tail length would change. If it was prehensile or not changed. Teeth, eye color, it would all change depending on like what was needed and what was necessary for the environment that I was in. For example, probably a little bit of a trigger warning. When I was deep in abuse with my ex, I gained the ability to breathe fire suddenly as a needed adaptation to scare them away. My eyes turned red to look scarier, I got bigger. This all happened internally as my ex was able to interact with our system in the inner world, which is a terrible idea, by the way. Do not be an idiot like me. Not a good idea. Um, so I needed to look that way and be scarier as a form of protection. Lately, I have been healing from trauma, and now that my ex is gone, so is the pressure to defend myself, so I turned all the way back into a mighty Anna, which is much more defenseless, but a lot truer to how I see myself in a safe space. I'm sure if trauma happened again, I would shift back to a threatening wolf as a means for protection. When it comes to plurality labels, I fall under protector and host. We're pretty integrated at this point, though, so we've grown out of most typical labels due to how functional each of us are now. So, this whole concept of a changing identity is kind of taboo in otherkin communities. Usually, we're led to believe when we're kids, as otherkin, learning about it, that we're kids, we have this one strict animal our whole lives, and the awakening is just us learning about this one animal. This animal never changes, it's static, and we just learn about it as we grow up. My experience has been wholly different. My animal and my identity changes based on my environment. It can be subtle or drastic. I never evoke or ask for the changes, they simply happen, and I have to adapt to the new way I see myself. Trying to apply my identity to the common otherkin rhetoric gave me a lot of grief as a teenager. When I was 13, um, I was going through my first awakening. Um, Something would happen, some kind of new stressor. My identity would shift, say, like breathing fire or growing in size, and I would be ashamed because I knew these changes were not typical or up to the otherkin standard of static identity. A static identity. As an aside, I also think this notion that my experience is atypical is also false. I think this is fairly common, but a lot of other kin just handle it in a way that flows with the static concept, where we learn we have a new kin type, but also still have the old one. We learn something about our kin type that totally shifts it, but connect it back to our old kin type. We find new features, personality traits, or experiences that now define our kin type that were never there before or newly discovered. Otherkinity is about self-discovery and how it's essentially chasing a dragon, literally. We will never fully know our internal identity, no matter how closely we look into it. There's so much that we learn and how we weave into our identity. Otherkinity is as much of an art as it is a science when it comes to self-reflection. It's just like any other aspect of ourselves. We can create labels for our sexuality, and they would work, but they don't capture 100% of what you experience. They're a shorthand for others. I find that Otherkinity is this concept on steroids. I find my identity to be a much larger part as it impacts everything, including my sexuality. It is much more prominent for me, so trying to put it under labels becomes increasingly difficult. How are we supposed to create a shorthand for who we are? All those moving pieces inside us that shape our perspective, experiences, and how we interact with people, how we love people, how we go through day to day life. And we're supposed to just say something like bare Therian. What if it changes? What if we have quirks that are outside of this label? When I first joined the Otherkin community, it was pretty frowned upon to change your identity. You had you had to be a Wolftherian. You had to be a Dragonkin. Once you picked that label, that was it. You're locking into your identity, and if you didn't, you weren't taken seriously. And that brings us to ableism and the Otherkin community. I question as well if this correlation between identity stability and maturity and credibility is ableism. Usually, I notice when I first joined the Therian and Otherkin community, there was a push for not looking crazy, so as to not get bullied further for identities. I'm sure anyone in the LGBT community knows trying to please people making fun of you really doesn't work. There's a prominent fear of seeming to outsiders as if we're role playing or kinning for fun, which seems to be a whole other topic in and of itself. My personal experience has led me to the conclusion that these people are going to come at you regardless of how often you shift your identity, how seriously or goofy you take it, how analytical you are with your identity, whether you write essays or just one sentence. It does not change the view of outsiders. Endels, clinical lycanthropes, and other non-humans who have mental illness-based identities face a similar ableism. It wasn't until this year, 2021, when the connection between mental illness and non-humanity was finally accepted by the greater community. Even still, endelic communities, which endel means a delusion-based otherkin identity, are more often treated as a novelty, not something to be taken seriously as an identity, just something interesting. Mental illness, especially psychotic disorders, aren't pretty or tame, and the greater non-human community appears to subtly enforce the stigma. Werewolves are monsters, and the greater community spares no feelings in reminding us of this. With such unwelcome words as my friend Baby Dog has given me, I paraphrase a quote here from my friend. You're welcome here, but you should expect people to be uncomfortable with your identity as an Endel, or question your Endelity. I don't personally believe people like you should be a part of alterhuman communities. End quote. Many of those who are part of the greater alterhuman community are still concerned about respectability politics, how we appear to outsiders, rather than being concerned about how inner community members are finding their welcome. Arguments like, but clinical lycanthropy was previously used as ammunition against all other kin, or playing into anti-kin stereotypes. It isn't an excuse anymore, because throwing your own community under the bus isn't acceptable anymore. We want a higher standard in the community, rather than being driven by shame to hide our own members. It's better to stand with them. Let's also take a moment to acknowledge that these actions stemmed from an act of seeming more credible and not crazy. And I'd like to say also that stereotypes of crazy don't really exist. When we think of crazy, we think of someone who's mentally ill and struggling to function. In reality, these people have an untreated mental illness or are going through an episode that's only one aspect of a person. They do other things with their life, including myself. I write poems, I go out with friends. But if someone only judged me at my worst and my lowest, I would fit into the crazy stereotype. It's not fair for us to judge people based on actions they can't control, based on trauma or brain chemistry. Um, I would like to think people are more than that, and I think you can agree. We should be understanding these people and treating them as whole people, not just one descriptor. Crazy is really just a derogatory name for someone with a mental illness, so to avoid being crazy means to avoid any signs of neurodiversity people view as abnormal, or any signs of nonconformity with neurotypicals. So, some things that are in the present day. Endels Endels still face ableism, typically in the form of being treated like a novelty and not really being taken seriously. Endels are still getting called interesting a lot, and it makes them feel like a specimen within their own community. I'm sure those who suffer from mental illness understand how degrading it is to be looked at some sort of test subject or lab rat. I think as a community, we can do better and be more accepting and open to all forms of otherkinity. Shutting down this kind of language would be great for Endel Otherkin. Endos are still having to deal with other community members who use psychotic, delusional, etc. as insult or jokey words. These words are derogatory and insulting, and they shouldn't be said as insults or jokes. There are plenty of other words that could be used, and it pushes endos and other kin with psychotic symptoms away from the larger community. Using this language shows an ignorance to ableism, um, shows an ignorance, and it shows that ableism is still alive and active towards endos. Furthermore, none of these actions help internalized ableism. All the actions described above only reinforce internalized ableism. This creates a combative and toxic environment for endos and other kin with psychotic symptoms. It would be in our best interest as a community to help bring down ableism and be more aware of what we're saying and to who. Some things to keep in mind. Treating psychotics like they can't make their own choices is not okay, neither is thinking for them. Insults and jokes using derogatory language is triggering and alienating. Treating psychotics as lab rats or as something to gawk at as interesting is demoralizing and takes away someone's individual power as a person. It's hard to have an identity and a voice if everyone is busy staring at you like a lab rat. So, what about the internal side of the Otherkin community? I found when I was a part of the Therian community, there was a much more prominent problem, and still is in some corners I wander into. Otherkinity also holds some ableist views, but from what I've seen, it's not from the same intensity as the Therian communities. This, I would say, is a cultural difference from the new age of Therians that took over the internet. Key-shifting cults, wolf packs, and some forums for Therians were intense. And I know previously Therians and Otherkin's identities didn't have too much of a difference besides labels that were animalistic tendencies or a way to further identify. Once this shift happened, it became more so about earthly creatures or animals based on Earth. Earth mythics, animals that exist in present day and extinct, and plants as well. I'm not an expert of the history of Otherkin and Therian, so I would direct you to House of Chimeras and Whois page for more information over it gladly. If I'm wrong, please correct me. That's my understanding. This shift to earthly animals also carried a sentiment or notion of being more real than Otherkin. I often experienced this in wolf packs and forums, since their identities were based on real animals, and made them more valid than Otherkin. An easy question I asked often, and others would ask, was a simple, why? And the response I experienced a lot was, so we're more credible / don't seem crazy. This was 8 to 9 years ago, which was at the time the height of Otherkin hate. It came across as a borderline phobia to be seen as anti-kin stereotypes, which were ableist stereotypes to begin with. Some of these communities, in reaction, created rigid and strict cultures on how to be Therian. This would leave an imprint on many people, including myself. So, that was 8 to 9 years ago. Why do I bring it up? Because I still see this sentiment present, just subtle. Some things I feel carried over were overly present and specific about kin types, an obsession with details and intricacies to a degree where it's no longer beneficial to learn, embarrassed or shamed for certain kin types, a focal point on kin type tendencies, and ignoring or pushing aside human experiences to further pronounce a kin type, a fixation on the past and not taking into account of the present, always centering around the past. I would say these behaviors in the community were influenced from the Wolfpack cultural shift. There are a remnant set of reactions from a more intense time, or these are a more remnant set of reactions from a more intense time of grilling, questioning, and if validity was questioned, your title could be easily taken away in the close-knit communities. I think the Otherkin community still has some skeletons in the closet, so to speak, of a more intense time that a lot of members endured and witnessed. We passed on this culture, myself included, as we grew up because it's how we learned to present our Otherkinity. We can unlearn, though, and I think it's time to push for more freedom and new ways to take on Otherkinity. A larger problem I see is a fixation with the past, which, once it gets to a certain point, I don't think can be constructive or healthy. Exploring your past is good. Gaining context for your actions and your background is good. But living in the past isn't healthy. Reshaping how you live in the present by escaping to the past really isn't healthy. I find it worrying how common it is for otherkin to not tie their humanity and the present to their identity. It hurts to say, it can be uncomfortable, but being human is a part of our experience. Now, my therapist always says, never damn a coping skill. If you're looking to the past and living in the past finds you comfort and keeps you stable, that's ultimately a good thing. You're staying stable and keeping you functioning. I urge, though, for people to start to take time to explore humanity with other kin identities and living more in the present, how your identity affects you right now, how people interact with you, what you can do to tie your other kinity to the physical world, to the present. I think it's a balancing act, ultimately, trying to find a sweet spot between the past and the present. Not completely ignoring your past and only staying in the present, or only living in the past and neglecting the present. It's not easy and something I'm actively working on myself. I want to highlight the present cultural imprint the Wolfpack phase in present-day Otherkin communities shows us, and how new Otherkin members seeing these um, imprints are reacting to it. We as old members may not realize how impactful our words are and may not notice us carrying an imprint of the past with us. Some quotes I picked up, I asked a few friends for their experiences who had come out as otherkin in the past 6 months. I was also able to get one anecdotal anon from my Tumblr after sending out a request earlier today. They are also pretty recent. Here's what they had to say. They are all anonymous. From Tumblr. My experience was pretty good, joining the Otherkin community. The community is super open and friendly, or at least the side of it I'm on. I don't know about Fictionkin side of it, which might be more controversial / full of discourse. It was easy to get into, which is good, but I was super scared about getting into it. Friend. The whole community is scary, for me at least, mostly because some of the older gray muzzles seem really intimidating and cliquey. The Discord group I'm in seems really cool to me. They're all super nice and helpful, but the rest of the community is super scary for me. Another friend. When asked about getting into the community, they said, it's weird to me. It really is. Like, I've spent a good chunk of my time just, like, wondering what it could possibly mean to be valid otherkin. Like, whose judgment is that? Mine? My take on otherkinity. I'm telling you my story because my mental illness causes me to fall into an undesired or taboo identity categories or stereotypes of otherkin often. I find instability, identities that are less material or easily relatable, signs of mental illness with otherkinity are swept under the rug. I'd like to change that and show that instability, less relatable, highly specific or vague identities are just as valid. My experience can be something of an uncomfortable truth for some, that otherkin can be cringy or be easier to target from outsiders. I asked to everyone that has some reservations about accepting more diverse identities to consider how beneficial these perspectives bring to our community. These identities give a perspective and voice we are missing and is needed. It's beneficial for our community to be heard fully so we can support and help everyone. Endels may have a perspective otherkin and Therians may not have considered before. The wider range of experiences about our community that we share, the better. It gives us tool to make the community even stronger. I would say overall, psychological kin are extremely diverse and no experience is going to be the same. It's difficult at best to say anything at all about psychological kin experiences because the definition is so broad. We all have unique and diverse stories, and I'd like to encourage everyone to share them even if they show mental illness. Things like delusions, trauma responses, trauma sourced, episodes, and regression. I would love to see more inclusivity for the messier and less understood part of psychological kin. So let's get into some specific experiences. Some of my specific experiences. My identity is pretty messy at the moment. My brain seems to have an interesting understanding of what a Mightyana is because it has two images instead of one. These two images are Houndoom and Mightyana. Both of them I see myself as, but they're the same entity. My brain can't see the difference between the two as an identity at the moment. So they're both Mightyana. It's quirks like this that I think should be seen as more acceptable in the community because it's messy at best and has made me on several occasions go, that makes zero sense. But from a trauma standpoint, it doesn't surprise me. My brain has trouble picking only one. If my 5-year-old or 3-year-old brain attached itself to both images and called them the same, well, that's what it is. I'm both of them at once. Brains don't tend to work very logically around trauma. And while it sounds confusing, I would say it probably feels something similar to having two kin types active at once. The two identities don't blend, i.e., Mightyana doesn't breathe fire while Houndoom does. I experience a range of both identities at once. They're both Mightyana. It just so happens that the image that's associated with it, one of them looks like Houndoom. Um, and they both act out their own associated feelings and states. I would say they're two different kin types, except if I say I have a Houndoom kin type, I don't think anything and I don't feel anything. There's no association there for a Houndoom kin type. When I say I have a Mightyana kin type, I have two images, feelings from both. They can't seem to be separated, and each association needs the other. It's interesting, it's funky, and it's the wonderful world of trauma. Could probably make a new label for that, but that is a-okay. I am not one for labels. I onto other weird quirks. I experienced something I call M shifting, which is really animal regression. It's called M shifting because I was previously in a P shifting cult where it developed. It's uncontrollable, but I can start it or trigger it if I want to, but can't control it at all once it starts. Once I go into an M shift, I can't understand English, read English, walk on two legs well, speak, or know basic things most people would know. My brain goes into instincts and impulses. I don't think critically or contemplate much. My thoughts are in images and feelings. It's fun, but it's difficult to control. I find it's a way for me to relieve stress and excess when I can't seem to find a good outlet for it. This is this part of my identity is what makes me relate to the werewolf community so much, since it's involuntary and frowned upon generally to greater society, aka internalized ableism. Let's go. One of my biggest fears is shifting in public or with friends. It's hard on me for sure. Another thing that affects me is coping leaking. As someone who deals with trauma, I found lately I'm starting to create involuntary coping links. I had a brief coping link with a sled dog. Its purpose was the personality of a sled dog was something I needed at the moment to stay functional and coherent. Once I learned to do that without my coping link, it went away. I noticed myself having brief coping links on and off. Each of them usually teach something or a skill I couldn't fully understand yet. Another thing I experience is false memories. My memories change depending on identity. I don't force or make them, they just change. They hold the same narrative of trauma throughout all the changes, though. The narrative, from what I understand, is a retelling of my trauma. My false memories don't seem to be a major part of my identity, and I think I may have them simply because of P-shifting cult trauma and the pressure to have a past life or neo-meta. I think my false memories are a way to retell trauma in a form that gives me validation as an animal. I do know seeing myself as human in memories is inherently triggering for me, as I can't recognize myself. So, a set of false memories that lets me see myself in those situations as an animal is comforting and validating. It helps me evaluate my trauma better and understand why I feel the way I do about trauma. A dog that loses its molars would be distraught, while a human doesn't really care if they get their wisdom teeth removed. Evaluating trauma through an animalistic lens has helped me immensely. I've noticed the more I evaluate and see trauma through an animal lens, the weaker my false memories become, and I think that's neat. Another thing is, my perspective of the world also changes as my identity shifts. I see the world differently as a mighty Anna than I do as a threatening wolf. Objects, people, and environments all have a changing association according to shifts, or how my identity changes. These associations and meanings are ones that either I had when I was a child, or ones I repressed due to being childish, or something I didn't see as acceptable as the time. So my identity now has a wider range of perspective. My threatening wolf perspective toned down a lot and let the repressed associations and meanings take a more dominant role. Another thing that affects my otherkinity is good old species dysphoria. I would say it's a large factor in how I experience otherkinity. I would say my otherkinity is something very based in the present. I don't think about my kintype's past. I don't think about its future, or let my mind wander off about what's going on with it. I'm usually observing in the present moment. A big part of that is my species dysphoria, which tells me a lot about what I am. I'm trans, female to male, and though that's debatable as I'm considering gender to my kintype, human gender dysphoria is something that bothers me to a decent amount, which has sent me, like just a decent amount, but what has sent me to therapy and getting help is species dysphoria, which is absolutely unbearable for me. And to cope with it, I have fangs, tail, collar, a wolfsbane pendant for the mythology about werewolves, pointed nails, short hair that's thicker to resemble my kintype. I had I had to learn how to make animal vocalizations like growling, snarling, and whimpering because I felt incredibly stressed about being unable to emote properly. I learned to walk on all fours. I learned to play and move around like an animal, mostly from M shifting, but it helps immensely. Getting on testosterone also helped a lot. Getting furrier, deeper voice, thicker hair, generally able to gain muscle better. Overall, all good things for my species dysphoria. Overall, it's something that I've always had that brings me immense discomfort. I'm also planning on making a prosthetic muzzle to wear and possibly some ears, but we will see about that. This dysphoria is apparent when you see me on the street because I'm wearing a collar and a tail, everything. I can't hide my otherkinity because it triggers my species dysphoria too much to hide, so I just have to roll with it. And the census it's not really that bad being out or showing that I'm otherkin. It's a good conversation starter, and most people are friendly about it, which has been nice. I do get asked if I'm a furry, and I usually just say yes because I don't feel like explaining my otherkinity all the time. I feel if someone asks why, I usually just say I see myself as an animal. Responses are mixed, but people are polite about it. Wearing gear makes me feel much more grounded in where I stand with my identity. I noticed I feel much more confident about myself when I'm being myself unabashedly. Who knew? Also planning to get some combat boots, add some spikes to them to imitate claws. Should be fun. Heading back to weird quirks though. Um, Phantom shifts. I experience those all the time, 24/7, in part due to P-shifting cult and also a way to manage species dysphoria. It's pretty intense for me, and it's something I find comfort in and encourage. It's a way for me to find the world more relatable. Often, these shifts calm me down and make it easier for me to navigate the world. I would say my phantom shifts only affect parts of my body I'm aware of and not the entire body all the time, rather, whatever body parts I'm using. It also does its best to not have any clipping through objects, and my shift may phase out if there will be clipping on that body part that I'm aware of. Lastly, my gender and sexuality, I would say tie to my kin type. I'm attracted to other kin more so than humans. I really like animalistic aspects to people and traits I see in my kin type and other people. I find I get along best with canine kin types. My gender, I'm realizing, is more tied heavily to my kin type, and I want to be a male Mightyena, whatever that entails. And it plays closely to my species dysphoria. I find when I relieve my species dysphoria, I also tend to relieve a bit of gender dysphoria as well. I say I'm female to male as a shorthand because that's what my kin type gender seems to line up with most, though I think it will be less and less the case as I start wearing things like a prosthetic muzzle, which is pretty animal gender to me. So, one last topic: therapy and otherkinity. Since we're all psychological kin, I'm sure it's going to tie in a lot, or at least a few of my good friends here. On this topic, I would like to talk about how therapy and otherkinity interact, because that's something central to this panel. For me, I always notice when I'm given analogies in therapy, they are always about an inner child, how I was a human kid, how I am as an adult. These things are good, but they lack the context of me as a whole. I'm not just a human, I'm an animal in a human body, which changes a lot in how I've had to take care of myself and apply advice given to me by professionals. For one, I always have to tell professionals I'm otherkin and what that entails, that this isn't a hobby or one aspect of me, but something that impacts my entire perspective. Methods of self-soothing won't work for me if I don't change some wording around. There is no inner child for me personally. There's a puppy, and a puppy seeks out an entirely different set of behaviors, emotions, emotes, and way of communication than an inner child would. You would be able to talk to an inner child and hug them and act as a type of parent to them. With a puppy, I tend to act more as like an owner or animal parent depending on what's needed. As an owner, I have to bridge communication gaps with things like chew toys, petting, dark cozying places, brushing, grooming, nonverbal communication. What plays a larger part in my healing process than what I read or what methods I'm taught is, as an owner myself, I have to learn to take care of my inner puppy the way I needed, which can be difficult, especially when no one around you has to follow that method. And as an animal parent, I also have to act as, well, an animal to my inner puppy, because that's what we both understand. That's the common language we speak. It's non human, and it's critical to my healing. I find protecting my inner puppy as an animal parent gives me a larger sense of catharsis. It just feels like something I can finally understand. However, the methods don't translate well to the real world. I can't just snarl at people. I have to talk to them in a disagreement. I can't go hunting. I have to go shopping, which is why I have to have both an owner and an animal parent. Both are important because both aspects can't be ignored and need to be used in tandem. And healing for me, when it comes to trauma, involves a lot of balancing between human life and my animalistic needs, which is something that I've had to explain to therapists, the difficulties of doing so. I notice most therapists I've met can't seem to grasp this and see Otherkinity as more of a metaphor than an identity. I noticed a lot of therapists would change metaphors to talk to me instead of reshaping a technique for healing, which has caused a lot of problems. An example I can think of off the top of my head would be a family sticks together would instead be said as a wolf pack sticks together, which is helpful sometimes, but if it's the only change, it becomes detrimental. Often because, while not intentional, I think a lot of therapies are human centric. There is an assumption you're human in order to apply the coping techniques and healing strategies. This leads to me unintentionally repressing a larger chunk of my other kinity just because I was applying these techniques without changing anything. Sometimes, present day, I still fall into this and notice it triggers my species dysphoria to worsen. It can be difficult to spot for me as well because Otherkinity is so uncommon. No one else is having the same issue in my real life friend groups. So I assume whatever I'm doing must be okay because it seems to work okay for everyone else, which ends up not being the case. A solution I found with this um, is explaining as I go with therapists, telling them what is and is not working, having to be an advocate for myself and teach them as well what I like and what works and what doesn't. I try my best to let them know something they do is detrimental. I also try to explain what brings me comfort and what doesn't. A nice talk isn't going to help my puppy self, but a hug would. Things like that. When it comes to internal imagery some therapists use, I know stating to them you'd like them to consider your kin type as yourself has helped me by them not seeing me as fully human or just trying to describe me in an IRL body. Overall, I hope this talk has helped some people, give some new perspectives, and I am happy to reiterate some topics I went over. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Let's get into the Q&A. So, any questions?
Uh, Scar. You go by Scar, right? Sorry, forgot for a second.
No, you're good. That's right.
Okay. Whenever you're getting asked questions, can you please make sure to repeat it so the recording gets it?
Sure, I can
Cool.
do
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Has therapy been any help with species dysphoria? Um, that's a good question. I would say overall yes, because while therapy may not be able to address like specifically species dysphoria, it can usually help with things like anxiety for actually tackling species dysphoria. Like for me, I was very afraid to wear gear, so my therapist helped me with getting comfortable to wear gear so I could lessen my species dysphoria, if that makes sense. Have you ever had anyone directly harass you for wearing gear being altered human? If so, how have you dealt with it? Um, I have not been harassed, which is very nice. I do get hit on a lot, which is not something I was ever expecting. Um, Especially because I wear a rainbow tail. I was like, this should be 100% I will get some like snide remarks or something. But I haven't been harassed yet. If I was harassed, I would basically be going, so what? Like, good for you, man. So happy for you that you disapprove. Anyways, I'm gonna go get a burger, and that's kind of it. I know it's very gay. The rainbow tail is indeed very gay. Are there are there any physical things you do for your inner puppy? Um, I would say getting toys, stuffed animals, really like stuffed animals. Giving myself massages if you know how to do that. That's pretty relieving, especially for me being more like canine centric. A massage around your neck where your scruff is, very good. 10 out of 10. Would recommend. Does help puppy. I have a question. How would you balance being independent and exploring puppy things? I don't know how to. I would say you definitely um, you have to learn how to be an adult and learn like how to also be a puppy and switch off from those things. Um, so it is difficult, but something you can learn in time. You said, let's see, here's another question. You mentioned before about non-human identities by caused by or closely linked to trauma. Do you think the community would be open to someone creating a term for those identities? Do you think that they don't exist yet due to stigma or ableism or some other reason? Partially because of ableism, partially because of ableism. I think the community's stunted in general. Most of us are kicked under the rug, like get the fuck back in there. We don't want to talk about this. Try and look a bit less crazy. And yeah, so I would say go for it. If you think that you have an idea for a label, I think it would be good to just push it out there, try it out, see what you like, see what you don't like. How did you find what gear helped, and what helped best? I'm a Pokemon, but a collar has been like my favorite thing, and that's not even like a body part, which is so funny to me. Um, because I think something about it, I think the symbolism the most, it's just directly like animal to me. Like there's no skirting around it. If you're wearing a collar, that's an animal collar. People have to face that directly. It feels like a loud billboard to just be like, hey, I am an animal. I am animal oriented, and you get to fucking deal with it. Um, I do think the prosthetic muzzle, that's gonna be fun in public, for sure, but I will see how that goes later. Do you have any tips for talking about kin stuff with a therapist for the first time, or like anything relative to that that would really help, especially a new therapist? Yes, I would say, first of all, I would ask them like basically like a staircase of questions where it's like getting more specific as you go so you can gauge how much you want to tell them. Because not all therapists are the same, and depending on how they react, then you can tell them more. So you can start with like, have you heard about furries? What do you think of furries? Can you tell me if you've ever worked with furries? Yes. Have you ever heard of otherkin? What do you think of otherkin? Are you comfortable with otherkin? Do you have experience with them? And then, like, I think I am otherkin. Um, is that going to be a problem? Is that something you've worked with before? Uh, Things like that. That's usually a good way to get a feel and set the tone, show them that you're serious about it, that it's not something really negotiable or something that's not a big part of your life. If you really want to, um, like say like worst case scenario, a therapist is like, oh, that's like a hobby or something, right? Like that's something, just be like, no, it's a serious identity. And it can be uncomfortable to have to stand your ground like that. You can either do that or just like let it go and like flow with it and then just like not go back. Depending on your confrontation style, both work. It can definitely be fun. Let's see. Do you have any tips on relieving gender dysphoria? If not, do you have access to gear due to your species? Oh, wait. Do you have any tips on relieving gender dysphoria if you do not have access to gear due to your species? Um, you could try to lean into symbolism. Um, like if it's really hard to replicate your gender, finding things that are symbolic of your gender, not necessarily a one-to-one, may be good. Um, that's about what I would do. I think for me, also art can be relieving for dysphoria. Finding an outlet in order to feel more real, role playing or being able to live out your experiences somewhere online or in a game or in real life. Like, parkour is actually one that I've considered because there's parkour where you're trying to move more or less like an animal, um, and trying to weave through everything, which is another,
I'm incredibly
um,
sorry to interrupt, but
mhm.
if you were answering Google's question, they meant to say species dysphoria as opposed to gender dysphoria.
Oh, okay. Same thing applies basically. So yeah, I would say symbolism, finding activities that may relate to your species dysphoria that you enjoy, finding a community online that you can use, talk to, get support. Um, yeah, it can definitely be a lot of trial and error, trying a lot of things, seeing what works, and then doing it again. There's a lot of brainstorming with it, and it also helps to just like turn to other people and be like, "Hey, what do you do for your for your species dysphoria? I just want to know," like, and get some ideas. Um, let's see what else we got going on here. How do you bring up to your therapist who rejects your anonymity that doing that is harmful to you? It can be difficult and it cannot be easy. Um, if you feel like your therapist is very hard-lined about it, it may be better. Um, okay, I think the first thing I would do is probably try and get some kind of research. House of Chimeras research about otherkin stories and books, art in general. That's like an archive where it goes all the way back to Greek times, showing that they've always been here. That could be a good way to turn a leaf with them, try and get them to see it in a new perspective, and show all these experiences that's like, hey, it's not just me. There's a wider community. It just happens that we've been like erased a bit. Um, if they don't react to it well, the best I could say is to journal yourself, see what they're talking about, write down the human-centric things, and trying to shift that on your own. If you really can't find another therapist and you really need that one, that might be a good method to do. I would focus on self-awareness, trying to see whenever they say something, does it hurt? Does it cause dysphoria? What is it causing? How can I fix that? Um, yeah, I hope that helps. I know it can be really difficult. Is there a word for an identity you take on unintentionally, but you don't consider to actually be a kin type?
Sorry to interrupt again, but Sin says you have 8 minutes.
Yep, I am well aware. We got a lot of questions. Um, let's see. Is there a word for an identity you take on unintentionally, but consider to actually be a kin type or realize something like that? Um, mayhaps, but I do not know one. So you can see that there's a bit of a gap there. Let's see. Do 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 do. Just scanning for questions. I'm a little bit backlogged. Where did you go to even find gear? Everywhere. Honestly, pet play. Yeah, like I know it's made for kink, but it's a good place to start. Besides that, there's also a few places on Etsy that sell like usually labeled under pet play harnesses or collars. I just usually use the word pet play, go look for something. There's a few Otherkin specific shops as well. Generally, I just try and look around and make something from nothing too, because it's a lot of work shopping. Like, well, I could make like um, my nails pointed. No one told me I could, but let's try it out, see if it helps anything. Just a lot of experimenting. Let's see. Oops. My poor chat. I think it wants to die because it's just so far back. Would you say that being kin overall has been helpful and fulfilling? To myself, yes. Like, I was born that way. Um, it's helped me navigate through life. It gives me a perspective I could never get if I was just human. It's made me meet people. It's made me have to be more confident in who I am, go out and explore the world, making connections I would never make. Overall, I would say it's beneficial. It's just really hard at the start whenever you're new and you're lost and you're fucking terrified. Human teeth bad. I agree.
Just as a warning, Soup, Scar, you have about 3 minutes left.
Thank you for calling me Soup. I really appreciate it.
I keep messing it up. Is that what you'd like to be called?
Just for this convention,
Okay, cool.
we're just going with it because, cause Soup. You know how it is.
Soup.
Soup. Well,
Soup.
oh my god. Wow, that GIF is like, that's something else. I think that is all the questions I got. Oh, there's one. What advice could you give to kin just starting? Um, House of Chimera's resource page is phenomenal. Um, Trying to find your kin type that you relate to most and finding your own community within that, joining discords that relate to your kin type or something around it, very beneficial. Having some kind of blog, community generally, um, it helps a lot, and a lot of people can help you on the right path. Um, Besides that, I think journaling is helpful. Um, I really like Tumblr just 'cause, even though it's kind of a dead site. I know, I'm looking at it, 58 minutes. I'm trying to answer as many questions as I can. How do you find out what kin you are if you're not sure? This will probably be the last question I can answer. Um, the question is, you don't, which is the beauty of Otherkinity, I would say, especially psychological Otherkin. You just kind of um, get all the details that you possibly have and go with it and go with what you know and just experiment and learn. I've been here for 7, 8 years and I'm still shifting all the time. And shifting's okay. You get used to it. It's definitely something that you have to learn to roll with the punches. Kind of like, oh, this is a new part about me. Okay, well, how do I integrate this into my life? Um, yeah. So thank you, everyone. I'm glad you guys liked my panel. Um, I hope it was beneficial. Have a good one.
And thank you.